Ladies and gents, welcome to GRX, and this is 40k, the Death Korps of Krieg. Warhammer 40k lore / history by the channel Lutino9. Okay. So I saw the first part of this. This is really good, detailed one. I already watched the arch video on this, and what's pretty interesting. And obviously he's gonna go into a bit more details and some subject here and there, and overall it's gonna be detailed video. It's a 1.5 hour video. So yeah, I guess we are gonna, we already talked about in this one that how all the noblemen or whatever rich people got addicted to power, started to create their own fucking militias, and just created this whole thing. Like, basically it goes through how historically events go, basically, right? Did I say that right? Yeah. This is what I love about Warhammer. They always take things from history. People became rich, powerful, of an empire, right? Certain people of an empire get rich and powerful, noblemen or whatever, and they start to get their own ideas and basically rebel or something, which is happened here. But obviously there are loyalists as well who thinks, going away from, rebelling against an imperium and an emperor is a fucked up thing. So overall, they're gonna, collide. And if I remember correctly, there's just gonna nuclear winters, this and that. They're gonna hold the planet up, and that's where we get the mask thing or whatever. Right, and he just talked about that, upgraded weapon, upgraded lasgun or whatever, right, from the loyalist side, that their Mechanicus friend or something that they know of, it just told them like, okay, you have to, count your shot, but this will give you edge. That's, the arts talk about, that's going to be the future, Death Korps of Krieg weapon, right, all the ridiculous weapons they have, there's going to be one of them. So yeah, let's watch this one, it's going to be awesome. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe. So I know which type of videos to react to more. I love Warhammer. I don't go into much of any lore type of thing, fantasy fictional type of thing ever, right? I love Tolkien, sure, but I don't know about it in that much detail. I love Elder Scrolls because I played games through all life, but I don't do much anything else. But Warhammer is something like, holy shit, I need to know everything about this, because like I said, it takes things from real history rather than taking from some different, tropes of Tolkien's and Star Wars. Of course it does that, but that's not the primary thing. It takes things from history, which is awesome. So let's watch it.
The loyalist breathing heavily through their respirator, looking down without pity or malice. Some claim they killed him there and then with a powerful lasbolt to the head, others that the poison gas would surely have melted his skin and began to liquefy his brain. An agonizing death, and surely more appropriate than wasting ammunition. None can know the truth for sure. This, though, is where things become more complicated. It had been presumed that the death of the chairman may enable some kind of compromise or de-escalation of the situation. But it soon became clear this was certainly not the case. Colonel Yerton and the traitor General Kraus...
That would have been the case if this was just an ambition of one man, the chairman. But I guess this is going to be the common feeling of everybody who's just gotten rich with power, right? Hunger with power. Even if chairman's dead, everybody around him, they're operating, still going to have the same feeling, because they also want to hold on to their power, right? They got drunk with power. So this is not one man's ambition type of thing. It's collective people. Chairman died, so what? The idea's still there. Right? They're not going to give up.
Would converse at length about the situation. But it becomes apparent that the enemy remain as embittered and blinkered as ever. The death of the chairman has changed nothing at all. To make matters worse, it appears that Yerton's daughter perished in their planned assassination assault against the chairman. Colonel Yerton was too iron-willed an individual to be shaken by such a revelation. They knew this was a risk on any mission, yet it certainly did nothing to pacify the entrenched positions of loyalist and traitor. The traitors merely reiterated their objections of remaining under the subjugation of the Emperor, that they did not accept the reality of being forced to endure and sacrifice their lives for the anonymous Imperium beset against horrors of the galaxy. Again, this is a common complaint by any who choose to rise up against the Imperium. The situation for the Loyalists is looking increasingly bleak, and under even heavier bombardment from the air, they have begun digging deep under their hive city, widening tunnels and storage facilities, creating a city below the city. The Archmagos reveals to Yerton that there exists a stock of technology below the surface from the Dark Age. It's unknown precisely what is contained there, leaving Jurten uncertain about what they could be potentially unleashing upon the planet in the near future. But he and the remaining loyalists had of course committed to following their orders to the letter. They must find some way by which to deny the planet to the traitors, as was dictated to them at any cost, by any means necessary.
That was the fucked up. Any means necessary, yeah, there you go.
Interestingly, despite how history often considers his actions, it's revealed to us that Colonel Jurten was originally strongly against the use of atomic weapons.
See, this is where the grim dark world enters, like grey areas enters, like who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, right? Because chairman and his people got drunk with power, you think like they're definitely the bad guy. But yeah, the loyalists are kind of radical. They'll bomb the shit out of everything rather than turning it over to the whatever, right? The chairman, whatever. They are not chaos, right? It's not like any means necessary protect the planet. No, they're just some people who just rebelled, right? They'd rather bomb the place than give to them. That's that's radical as it can get.
Magos explained that as they originated from the Dark Age, the Mechanicus only had fragments of their schematics, and so were unwilling to dismantle them for fear of accidentally detonating them. So instead, vaults like this one must remain locked away. It was said though, that even one of the weapons could be enough to contaminate and strongly poison the land for many generations, and just one would be enough to effectively destroy an entire hive city. The difficulty though was in their delivery. Such slow and obvious missiles would generally easily be intercepted by fighters or air defences of a hive city, making a direct attack problematic. As the war continues to grind on, Jurten is seeing a distinct lack of progression, and so then begins to consider that maybe the cost of lives in the use of a nuclear weapon is warranted to end the overall conflict. This harsh rationalization proves to be extremely disturbing to his close aides, so much so that they choose to even anonymously contact the traitor General Kraus in a vague attempt to dissuade him from pushing the war further.
Seriously, I mean, the hive cities have billions of people with a B. Billion. Hive cities have billions of people, and it's just like, yeah, that's okay, sacrifice. Like, holy shit. I get it, the scale is bigger in this time period, right? So if scale gets bigger, the context would kind of be the same, right? Like if somebody bombs some city, nukes some city here, and when the casualty number would feel the same as here because the people are that many, but still, billion is a big fucking number.
Fear that Jurten may then actually use the deadly Dark Age weapons. Unfortunately, without an explicitly detailed explanation, General Kraus is unable and unwilling to really comprehend the threat that is being posed, nor does he even believe it's a serious threat. Perhaps it's just mind games to put them at some disadvantage. But Kraus also felt a troubling gut feeling, a gnawing sting of unease, something he remembers about the chairman speaking of long ago, stories of weapons from the Dark Age, before the Age of Strife. He tried hard to recall, but couldn't specifically draw the information. He was probably just being paranoid, overthinking things. One of Jurten's trusted officers is panicking about the use of these weapons, and in doing so attempts to visit the vault where they're being kept, only to find to his horror...
Why are they talking about nukes and atomic power as there's something distant technology? They don't have that around this time, is that what you're saying? But don't Inquisition do this exterminatus crap? Isn't that nuclear type of weapon anyway? How do you destroy a whole planet otherwise? How do you do exterminatus? Right? So don't they already have nuke weapon? What is happening here?
They have all been removed. Of course they've been removed by Jurten and Griel, and things are now reaching a critical point. Jurten had clearly spent many weeks and months calculating all possibilities in coordination with Archmagos Griel. He was a straight-talking Imperial officer, and his belief in the Emperor so strong that he felt no shame in his conclusions. There was nothing to hide here, nothing that couldn't be discussed. In his mind, they had limited options. Because, realistically, the alternatives were surrender, failure, and certain death. The enemy would not entertain any compromise, plus Colonel Jurten had been ordered not to accept any himself. So he would clearly lay out to his officers the situation and the strategy, even to those that he clearly knew had considerable fears or doubts. He explained to them calmly and clearly exactly what these weapons were, why, and how he planned to use them. Jurten did not ask for any opinions on his strategy, he made statements, as always. He would declare exactly what was going to happen and how it must be carried out. To him, there was no alternative other than to launch a preemptive strike against the enemy hive city. They felt confident that by sending one missile first, the surprise of using a weapon that the enemy had no ability to expect nor understand would demonstrate the power they hold and the futility of continuing the war. Shockingly, after this meeting, the officers attempt to relieve Jurten from duty. Suspiciously, he calmly agrees, only to have loyal elites launch a surprise attack and kill them all, with Jurten then delivering a final execution to his closest rebelling aide. No mercy, no compromise. The stubborn defiance, actions, confidence and attitude of Colonel Jurten clearly display the template for the Death Korps of Krieg. The man was absolutely unshakable, and he never even intended to create the Death Korps in the first place. They simply came into existence out of necessity. With the execution of his rebelling officers, there is nothing to stop Colonel Jurten from unleashing nuclear apocalypse upon the world of Krieg. In these last moments though, Jurten makes an additional devastating further calculation. He rationalizes that one missile is not enough, because whilst one missile, even if it were to successfully hit its target, inevitably risks retaliation by the powerful air force of the traitors. If they were to mark the missile silo as a target in retaliation, they'd be finished. He also considered philosophically that at this point, no matter the actions that were taken, the world he once knew was already dead. It couldn't be saved in the true sense.
See, this is where I'm like, okay, first of all, you're trying to make sure the Krieg stays in Imperium. That's what the fight is. So, Chairmanist people doesn't take it over, right? Or basically rebel against Imperium, because that's a problem, right? That's what loyalists are thinking. But now you come to a point like, okay, leaving anything alive is going to be a problem. Like, then what's the point of any of this, right? Is this about just message now that nobody can rebel against the Imperium? Because you're already thinking about killing Krieg, right? Killing people of Krieg, because nobody can be left alive, right? Because there will be retaliation. So what's the point of any of this, right? So this is when, when somebody set out to do something, and in order to achieve that goal, they forget everything, that even the core goal becomes, foggy. And end result doesn't even make sense. This is the prime example of that. Shit like this also happens, right? There's been cases like this throughout the history. Not the nuking, but, ridiculous shit like this that just, hanging on to one objective even though end result doesn't make sense. That is just fucked up.
At this point, the war, the bitterness, the factions were far too embedded. Thus, Jurten concludes his only option is the annihilation of the world using all the atomic weapons, a conclusion that Archmagos Grill had already long realised, but chose not to even voice. As all the missiles were fired, few of the enemy could really comprehend what they were seeing. Such weaponry was far beyond the experience of anyone in this time, so few worlds had experienced the forbidden weapons of the Dark Age of humanity, despite the advanced time for the humans in the Imperium. So even the traitors in their city were unable to comprehend what Jurten had hoped to achieve with such a small burst of missiles. A tiny volley would do nothing to their hardened, reinforced outer walls of Hive City Oros. The general was alerted.
See, even in the game Fallout and many places, any post-apocalyptic type of TV shows, movie, they show these rockets launching where they are, implying that they are launching rocket just as their enemy has launched a rocket on them before the bomb happens. Usually missile silos are not at the residential place, so that's not going to happen. But still, seeing scenarios like that, right? Like, or nuclear, basically alarm goes off in your town. Oh, nuclear annihilation is here, and you see these rockets launching. Like, there would be such a devastating scenario, right? But reality, that's not how it would happen, because missile silo is not going to be anywhere around people where people live, basically. So you would not know a missile is coming until maybe your town has an alarm system, whatever, or maybe before you don't realize it just hits, because these are going to be ICBMs, basically, right? These are going to be missiles that are way too fast. Before anybody can even realize it's hitting, there you go, right? Boom, right? And even the nuclear blast is so fast, like unless you're really far away, you're gone anyway. So usually nuclear attacks, most people won't even realize before everything's done. And when they do realize, it'll be already way too late.
But remained entirely unconcerned. Strangely though, these missiles appeared to be flying straight up. They were not seeking any specific target. The reasoning, of course, was that directly targeting enemy positions or the hive was calculated to be now too risky. The missiles would probably be intercepted, and this is why Jurten and the Archmagos had decided to explode them in a manner that would ensure maximum destruction, albeit of a different kind of destruction, one of a slow, poisoning death purge rather than instant annihilation. So the scores of missiles would roar their way out from High Ferrograd as the traitor rebels watched on, confused and exposed across the open planet's surface. The hive cities of the traitors took no immediate action. Vents were not closed, protective shields not raised. None were able to understand their impending slow extermination. It should be noted that nuclear weapons...
Protective shields are not up. What the fuck? You see a rocket that just launched in front of you. Regardless of if you're confused or not, first step should be, let's get the shields up because it's a fucking rocket, right? If it turns and attack you, you won't have time to process. You see a rocket flying, you put your shields up regardless of where it's going.
Are still very much used by the Imperium in the 41st millennium, but they're likely far more powerful than when they were originally conceived in the unknowable ancient history of humanity. The Mechanicus understand their power, not to mention generally being fearful of anything which originates from the Dark Age or beyond, because although it might appear clear what it is supposed to be, who knows once you start messing around with the mysterious languages from the Dark Age. So weapons such as these are usually kept, as we said, locked down heavily by the Mechanicus, only to be used in the most severe combat engagements. The fact that Imperial cyclonic torpedoes or other weapons used in the process of exterminatus are objectively more powerful should not understate the fear of causing long-term irradiated damage to our planet. This is why
Alright, what the fuck was that?
Causing long-term
Is it this? Like, what kind of a missile would take to do this at this scale of the planet? No, that's just ridiculous. But seriously, all those, atomic nuclear bomb, videos you see where there's like exposure of the video feels really weird. It becomes too white and flashes. That still doesn't capture the level of brightness it would have, right? I think lots of people would just die of shock just because how bright it would be. Especially if it's a hydrogen bomb, a fusion bomb basically, right? That would be like creating a small sun where it hits. That would be extremely bright. So that first glance where it suddenly is bright, like holy shit, that would be terrifying.
Radiated damage to our planet. This is why only during the Crusade and the subsequent heresy did you see Space Marine destroyer squads using rad weapons. After the heresy, these were effectively outlawed, and you very rarely see standard Imperial units using radiation-based weapons now because of the long-term damage that can be caused. So most of the weapons fired from High Ferrograd were deliberately detonated high, unleashing tons of lethal material and turning the very atmosphere of the world into a nuclear fire. The consequences of this would be a total collapse of the planet's ecosystem and climate. Bizarre storms raged across the world, and the planet's sun was heavily obscured by the nuclear winter, which now consumed the entire planet. Of course, Jurten's forces had been apparently prepared in advance for this event, even if they didn't know the specifics. Some were left at their stations outside, presumably to maintain appearances, and the Archmagos presumably had the equipment necessary to help protect the loyalists from the very worst conditions that were to come. As well as closing down all ventilation into their hive and water systems, the civilian population was secured deep underground. The traitor, General Kraus, would live long enough to see the devastation that Jurten had unleashed. His extreme bitterness and outrage must have been entirely visible. Both sides of the civil war on Krieg were so dug in, literally, that when Jurten had last communicated to Kraus, he did not even attempt to discuss any possibility of surrender or compromise. It was clear that no discussion could be had, no chance of saving the world. Yet for Kraus, this new reality was something he could not have anticipated, made only worse by his now impending defeat. If not today, then surely very soon. Until this moment, The idea that he might lose the conflict, or that there were any chance of any other outcome than their glorious victory, had not even entered their minds. But now, as he looked across the feeds and reports of a burning world, a planetary ecosystem collapse, an atmosphere that was burning.
That is not glorious victory when you kill a fucking planet, let's be honest, right? It's just a victory then. A sad victory in a way, but that is not glorious victory. This is equivalent of two people fighting to see who's best. Fighting carries on and one of the people just takes out grenade and basically blows everything up, possibly including themselves. Like, what's the point of this? You just killed the whole planet while they're trying to rebel. This just, I don't know.
His soldiers scrambled for any cover they could across the wasteland between Hive cities, now pinned down by acid rain that burned through their armour and skin. For the leaders, this was intolerable to see. Kraus retreated to his quarters and shut himself into isolation. Meanwhile, panic was spreading among the traitors. They were leaderless and their world was spiralling into a hellish nightmare in real time. Fields were burning, casualty reports were everywhere, water supplies contaminated, internal Hive City atmosphere's toxicity readings were off the scale. For the general, some part of him undoubtedly even now was unwilling to accept defeat. There was too much pride, too much ego to face reality. Yet he felt undoubtedly panicked, for he could do nothing to stop this oncoming apocalypse. It is widely presumed that rather than face the impossible situation head-on, the traitor General Kraus took his own life. The traitor propaganda of course spun other stories to cover for the fact that they were the ones who had been led down this path to their own destruction. Kraus, like the chairman before him and so many random anonymous dictators across the galaxy, were left with a choice between remaining completely disconnected from reality and facing the fact that he had severely underestimated the enemy. He'd been consumed by his own hubris, lust for power, arrogance, and that it was all of this together which had now brought complete annihilation to their world. Interestingly, although the most likely outcome, even Imperial loyalists were not satisfied with this explanation, because it would mean that Kraus had escaped the ever-present wrath and inevitable justice of the Imperium. Colonel Yerton would be the first to see this new world. He wanted to see it with his own eyes, despite this being unnecessary. They had vid feeds that could show them the situation on the surface, but Yerton felt it important that he bear witness to the horror he had unleashed upon his world. He wore a face respirator to protect from the highly toxic air that would burn him internally. He wore a heavy coat to protect against the intense cold and some of the radiation blowing across the world.
The only thing comes to my mind is screaming, dick. You just go walk around to see the world you created, the world you fucked, right? But there is a saying, live another day to fight or something like that, right? If nothing would have worked, I guess even the defeat would have been acceptable. So maybe you can fight one day again. Imperium would have come, eventually. Krieg cannot fight against the whole Imperium, right? You could have made case. You would have gone to Terra or something, make case to Imperium or something, ask for Astartes or something, and eventually they would have kicked ass of any, traitor or whatever that was, right? Kraus or whatever. You didn't need this. This was way too fucking extreme. I don't even understand what's the matter. You had the higher, hand there. For a moment being, there was no, Imperium ships or anything nearby, and your defeat was inevitable. Sure. Maybe you would have been even killed, sure. But Imperium eventually would have taken over the planet and suppresses all this rebellions because they cannot take on the whole Imperium. And you bombed this for what? You killed everybody for what? This is way too extreme, man. And just walking around, this is the world I created. Well, fuck you.
Those at the surface level may never see the sun again. Unknowingly, Yerton would be the first to wear the uniform that would soon become synonymous with the planet of Krieg. For any of the traitor rebels who were left outside and within also the other Hive worlds, they would suffer considerably more. The severe radiation that fell upon the planet, far more than even the most ancient weapons of humanity, would lead to the steady deaths of billions, not to mention the physical harm immediately caused. The survivors remained wounded, dishevelled, disorientated, generally in a state of shock. And this is where Yerton's Death Riders began to scour enemy lines of survivors.
let's change water. So
A small adjacent note, one of the very notable units of Krieg before and after the apocalypse were their Death Riders. As the hugely destructive war had raged across Krieg, it had become increasingly difficult for both loyalists and traitors to use tanks and other vehicles, primarily because of the ongoing war of attrition, and this meant that logistical supplies quickly became scarce, coupled with the knowledge and the manpower needed to pilot the vehicles and keep them operational. This was impeded severely as the casualty list increased exponentially every day. On top of this,
You know that Mass Effect, I guess in Mass Effect 3 and even in 2, I guess. You go to Tashunka, right? Tashunka, whatever. Basically that is also a post-nuclear place where you take, massive trucks and ride around. I'm imagining that when I'm thinking of this time around, where the tanks and soldiers, death soldiers, whatever, is walking around and whatever doing, and I'm imagining that scenario. Because that's how it would be. Everything destroyed, everything smoke, radiation everywhere, holy shit.
the devastating use of artillery and trenches meant that the land itself became extremely difficult to traverse, so the Archmagos had the surprising non-mechanicus idea to use mounted cavalry to give them an edge over the enemy. Breeding and heavily genetically modifying the variety of equine on the world was not a challenging task, gifting it a physique far stronger than a Terran horse. Its new adaptation enabled the mount to power through thick mud or over rubble, with its splayed feet also better to adapting and moving in difficult or nearly impassable terrain. They could be bred quite quickly with the technology available, and so war horses were raised to be ridden as specially trained cavalry companies for the Loyalists. Psychologically, these creatures are far more aggressive than their domestic Terran ancestors, with drug injectors being used to make the creature fearless in the face of an enemy. In battle, the creature will charge directly into the foe's lines and will not be startled by weapons fire or explosions. Due to the Krieg steed's unstable body chemistry, it has to be constantly monitored by its rider and stabilized with additional chemicals. This means the creature can sustain also injuries that would kill lesser creatures, but leaves many of these mounts with horrible scars from previous wounds. The results even prior to the apocalypse were impressive, and often caught the enemy completely by surprise. The speed of their attacks in the horrifying conditions, combined with them being very easily replaceable, made them valuable for a variety of roles. In the aftermath, the steeds of Krieg were even more critical, enabling fast raids on heavily weakened enemy positions, allowing the riders to attack or recon enemy trench lines and return to the safety of the hive while minimizing their time out in the open air. The Krieg steed would be equipped with armor to protect its head, and a respirator system was adapted to protect them, as it would their riders, from poison gases and toxic atmospheres. In the modern period, these Death Rider mounts would now be grown in vitagenic cloning vats deep below the surface, with their gestation carefully monitored by the Mechanicus biologists. They're all branded at the genetic level for any necessary identification purposes. So, the extreme conditions that now existed on the planet's surface also meant that realistically any major assaults between the hive cities was becoming quickly impossible, at least in the short term, thus enabling Jurten and the Loyalists more time to dig in, consolidate their positions, and resist against the rebels, who were reeling from the massive change to the planet, and their own hive cities and populations were heavily contaminated. Their leaders' arrogant overconfidence meant that the attack had caught them at their weakest and least prepared. They suffered heavily during the initial fallout, while the planet was being lashed by nuclear fire, and the extremely strong radioactive fallout crippled a massive amount of the enemy forces, who were now either extremely sickened, walking wounded, blinded, or any other number of ailments. Many were just suffering from extreme mental depression and disillusionment at the state of their world at this point.
Seriously.
Suffice to say, the will to fight and the morale of the enemy was at rock bottom. Many would surrender, take their own lives, or just engage in pointless assaults. The nuclear annihilation unleashed by Colonel Jurten had turned the prosperous industrial and agricultural world into a barren, dead, irradiated wasteland. Krieg was no longer a hive world, it had become quite literally the most feared classification of Imperial planet, a death world. For those, mainly Loyalists who lived...
Seriously, man, I understand everything, but Krieg was so prosperous. That is the reason why the traitors became traitors in the first place. They were getting hungrier with power because there was power, power to be had, right? Their militias were becoming stronger and stronger, right? Because how good the Krieg was. And they just fucking destroyed the planet like that. It became a death world now. That is so fucked up, right? How did the Imperium got pissed off to Yurton? Like, you asshole, we could have come back and taken over the planet eventually. You didn't have to kill it, right? You just killed a cash cow right there. But damn. Alright, people, I guess that's 30-minute mark. I'll take another one next time, I guess. How much is left? Holy shit, it's just like 40-minute video left, right? I think I'll do the whole one tomorrow or something. But yeah. This is really interesting video all around. I like the detail about it. That asshole Yurton. I don't know how people think about it, but I'm gonna think about him as an asshole, right? Because this is just way too fucking extreme. Right, well, if you like what I do, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.